The public notice from the Department of Governmental Efficiency, DOGE, and this FCC document entitled Delete, Delete, Delete. It is document number 25-133. What are my thoughts? There's been several videos on this subject, and I've commented on a few of those videos. I wanted to give you my thoughts on what I think about this whole thing and where we're going to see it go. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of stuff that the document doesn't talk about, but I wanted to address it head on because I'm getting a lot of questions about it, so here's what I think. Today's video is sponsored by SPE Expert Amplifiers. Check out their website, mtcradio.com, from Main Trading Company in the USA. Okay, so the document that started all of these, and I've seen 2, maybe 3 videos from different YouTube channels specifically about this document and how it may or may not affect amateur radio license. This is a public notice. It was released in March 12th of 2025, so less than a week ago at the time of this recording. It's titled Reason, Delete, Delete, Delete. Okay. Now, I must say this. As a general rule, I am all for smaller government, less government intrusion in personal lives, and just less government power in a general sense. Talking very high level here. I am not in favor of abolishing the FCC completely, and I'm not in favor of just free-banding every radio frequency spectrum out there. So I'm going to get into that. I'm going to explain a little bit what I mean by that. But I wanted to kind of start here where this document started. And this is a pretty long document. You guys have probably read this already. And if you haven't, I will link it in the description below. Okay? There's a lot of different things in here mentioned. One thing I will say, first off, is that nowhere in this document is amateur radio specifically mentioned. It mentions nothing about amateur radio licensing. It mentions nothing about GMRS licensing. It mentions nothing about CB radio being free band, because used to be back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, you used to have a license to get on CB radio, citizens band radios. The same frequencies, they gave you a license. I don't remember if you had to pay for it or not. But nothing like that is mentioned in this document, okay? Through a series of executive orders, President Trump has called on administrative agencies to unleash prosperity through deregulation and ensure that they are efficiently delivering great results for the American people. So this is Elon's email to everybody saying, hey, send me 5 things you did this week. Cool, you know. By this public notice, the FCC is taking action to promote policies outlined by President Trump in those executive orders. Specifically, we are seeking public input on identifying FCC rules for the purpose of alleviating an unnecessary regulatory burdens. Now, there is a link to voice your public opinion, and I will put that in the description below. But we seek comment on deregulatory initiatives that would facilitate and encourage American firms' investments in modernizing their networks, developing infrastructure, offering innovative and advanced capabilities. The Communications Act directs the FCC to regularly review its rules to identify and eliminate those that are unnecessary in the light of the current circumstances, recognizing that in addition to imposing unnecessary burdens, unnecessary rules may stand in the way of development, expansion, competition, and technological innovation. Now, that again, amateur radio is not mentioned in this article. However, I will say this, the way I read, and this is open to interpretation. This is open to interpretation, and you might not read this the same way that I read it. The Communications, I think they might be talking about the Communications Act of 1934. There's not a footnote down there that says it says the Communications Act. There's a Wireless Communications Act of 1934 that's often referred to in these types of documents. So right here it says the Communications Act directs the FCC to regularly review its rules to identify and eliminate those that are unnecessary in the light of current circumstances. In other words, times change as the years go by. Recognizing that in addition to imposing unnecessary burdens, unnecessary rules may stand in the way of development, expansion, competition, and technological innovation. So the way I read that is that amateur radio licensing is a good thing, because amateur radio licensing has always been regulated with the worldwide goodwill in mind. It's always been about international goodwill. It's always been about a worldwide effort. And I'm going to talk about the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, and I'm going to talk about a couple other agencies and what my thoughts are on that. So that we're going to get into that here in just a second. But stand in the way of development, expansion, competition, and technological innovation. Every nation, every civilized nation, some uncivilized nations in the world has some sort of amateur radio licensing. One of the things that hams seek after and compete with yourself more than anybody, is to see how many DX entities you can work. DX entity just simply means another country outside of the USA. And in some regards, Alaska and Hawaii are considered DX entities because they're not actually attached to the continental USA. And even Canada, which is and Mexico, which are attached to the continental USA, are considered DX entities. So contacting these worldwide countries all over the planet and entities, and last count I had, there was like 350 of them. I got a good friend of mine that's worked 349 out of the 350. He's worked all of them except one, which is North Korea, which is apparently really, really hard to get for reasons that you should already know and I won't go into. So international goodwill has always been an act behind amateur radio and amateur radio licensing. So I don't read that as something that would be like, hey, let's just get rid of licensing. Let's just get rid of it. That way anybody can do whatever they want. No, that would be an unnecessary rule that might stand in the way of development, expansion, competition, and technological innovation, because amateur radio, historically, that may or may not be true today, but amateur radio historically has always been on the forefront of technology. And I think that a lot of people who don't understand amateur radio don't understand that it's actually kind of still there. But again, that might be a different story for a different day. So a couple of things real quick. I want to start at the beginning. And I apologize if this video is going to be longer than normal. But I want to start at the beginning, okay? And I went to ChatGPT, and I was like, hey, ChatGPT, now let me say this first off. Let me say the first thing I'm going to say about this. I asked ChatGPT this question yesterday, and then I asked ChatGPT the same question today, and it gave a slightly different answer. So I'm not 100% sure how accurate this is, but I did do about the last half hour, I did some Google searching. I read some articles. I'm going to share those links with you. And for the most part, I think this is fairly accurate. Some of this information historically is ambiguous, and I think it's just because no one ever recorded it. But some of it is accurate. So, what was the first amateur radio call sign issued in the USA? The first amateur radio call sign issued in the USA, according to ChatGPT, was 1AW. This was assigned to Alfred C.W. Lee. CW was his middle initials. Okay, good. Yeah, no coincidence there. In 1912, following the introduction of the first formal licensing system for amateur radio operators by the U.S. government, the issuance of 1AW marked the beginning of amateur radio regulation in the U.S., which is formalized by the passage of the Wireless Ship Act of 1910 and the Radio Act of 1912. Okay, this predates the ARRL. This predates the FCC. And then, when did amateur radio call signs go global? This information here was accurate from ChatGPT both yesterday and today. Amateur radio call signs became global in 1927 when the ITU standardized the allocation of call signs for amateur radio operators worldwide. This was part of the broader effort to organize and regulate global radio communications. Before this standardization, amateur radio operators had their own systems and practice for assigning call signs, often within their own countries. The ITU's involvement helped establish a consistent system that assigned different country prefixes, such as W for the United States, G for the United Kingdom, VK for Australia, etc. Amateur radio operators allowing for clearer and more coordinated communications across borders. This move significantly enhanced international communication and cooperation among amateur radio operators worldwide. Statement that I would agree with right there. So outside of the USA, I decided to ask it, hey, what was the first ever amateur radio call sign? And I have a point to this, so bear with me. The very first amateur radio call sign ever was issued worldwide was A. A. Your call sign is A. Hey, Alpha. Your call sign is A. Assigned to Reginald A. Fessenden, a pioneering Canadian inventor, engineer, and radio operator. He is often regarded as one of the fathers of modern wireless communication. Fessenden was granted his call sign in 1900, long before the formal nationalization and international licensing systems were established. He used this call sign for his experimental radio stations. He worked to lay the foundation for much of modern radio, including the first voice transmission over radio. Later, amateur radio licensing systems became formalized in the 1910s and 1920s. A can be considered the very first amateur radio call sign in the world. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, was established on June 19th, 1934, with the passage of the Communications Act of 1934. This is the Communications Act I think that we were talking about earlier. FCC was created to regulate interstate and international communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. It took over many responsibilities previously held by the FRC, Federal Radio Commission, which had been established in 1927 to regulate radio communications. FCC's creation helped bring a more structure to the rapidly growing field of communications, including both commercial broadcasting and amateur radio, and it played a major role in shaping modern telecommunications policies in the USA. So, in other words, I have said this before and said this many times, amateur radio license existed prior to the FCC. People like to gripe about the FCC, they like to complain about the FCC, and the FCC is responsible for issuing licenses in the USA today. Okay, they are responsible for that. But if you were to get rid of the FCC tomorrow, which I don't really agree with that, but if you were to get rid of the FCC completely tomorrow, it wouldn't affect amateur radio license necessarily in the way that some people think it might. It would affect something, sure, but not necessarily in the way the way that some people think that it might. Oh, just get rid of everything and let everyone go free band. No, because it wasn't free band before the FCC was here. So it's not going to be free band after the FCC. There's plenty of options out there for free band, and those frequencies can range from country to country, from continent to continent. But amateur radio has always existed prior to the FCC, prior to the Federal Radio Commission in the United States, and it exists globally, internationally, across the entire planet. Some other Google site says, before the Radio Act of 1912, amateur radio operators in the USA used self-assigned call signs, often initials like Hiram Percy Maxim's SNY in 1911. After licensing began, the government assigned call signs, initially a number followed by two letters like 1WH or something like that. Pre-1912 self-assigned call signs, Radio Act of 1912 government-issued call signs, evolution of call signs, some good stuff on Google right here that I found, so that was good. There's also a good article I found here called The Storied History of the Ham Radio Call Sign by Mike Ritz, W7VO, written in August of 2017. This is a good read right here. I will put a link to this in the description below. You guys can go check that out. Again, I didn't check it for historical accuracy. He does quote several, he has a bibliography at the bottom there and quotes several links to where he got his information from. So there you go. But today's document, we're talking about this here today. Speaking of ham radio, today's video is sponsored by SPE Expert Amplifiers. Main trading company in Texas is the primary distributor of the Italian expert amplifiers inside of the USA. And now they have at least 2, maybe more, repair centers inside the USA, so that if you ever have a problem with your amplifier, you don't have to send it back to Italy anymore. Check out the link in the description below for all of the really cool, lightweight, some of them are full-powered amplifiers offered by Expert Amplifier, a leading name in amplifier technology and amateur radio for the last couple of decades. Check out the link in the description below and thank them for sponsoring this video. So, a couple of my thoughts on this, and I'm going to start here. So, Josh did this video, and he was, you guys go watch Josh's video, but he was kind enough to pin my comment to his video. I didn't ask him to, he just did it. And my comment here, which is what I've been talking about so far in this video, okay, people forget that licensing and testing outdates the FCC. They are more of an ITU, International Telecommunications Union, and IARU, the International Amateur Radio Union, thing. Other regulations that we face can be deleted. Sure, I am usually for deregulation overall, but some comments will probably be about making ham radio bands free band, and I don't support that. And that was my comment on his video. And then I had about 17 replies to it. So Josh commented here, he's like, I wanted to tie this to international agreements, but at the rate we're walking away from agreements in other areas, I'm not sure how well that would stick. Follow-up video, okay. This guy says what? KQ4LNZ says, no, I don't support that either. A Droit 1911 says, why don't you support it? And this is kind of the point I wanted to talk about here, because this guy, I don't know who this person is, but he had some good comments. Not bad-mouthing anyone. He had some really good comments, so I appreciate his comments there. I was trying to get rid of that thing on the right, but I can't. Why don't you support it? And I said, why should I support it? There's plenty of free band options already available, and anyone is able to get a ham radio license. A lot of people forget that. A lot of people, oh, ham radio is an exclusive club. No, it's really not, because you can go get a license. Everyone has the ability to go get a ham radio license, unless you're like a hardened criminal, okay, like a sexual predator of some sort, okay? Everyone can go get an amateur radio license, okay, for the most part. And I go on to say, it's more open to everyone. Nearly 800,000 U.S. citizens have taken the time to learn the material and get their license. Giving it away would be an insult to them, similar to forgiving student loans. That's another political topic I don't want to get into today, but that's how I feel. And he says, I don't think you actually answered my question. Yeah, I did. I get that it would hurt people's feelings that spent money on getting a permission slip. Okay, so first of all, hurt people's feelings and permission slip makes me think that this guy is not really serious. He's talking in troll language here, okay? But what he's saying is not entirely wrong. I just, okay, well, let's continue. And I understand why the government wants people to get those slips. Aside from hurt feelings, why not support deregulation? And I replied back to him, as I originally stated, licensing has nothing to do with the government. It existed before the government, before the FCC, okay? As I just read to you. That's what this guy's not getting. It existed prior to the FCC. Amateur radio is a worldwide effort. Other countries have some sort of license. Most of them are actually harder to get and cost more and have less privileges than what we do inside the USA. Hurt feelings aren't even a factor to me. Lots of people worked to get their license, and everyone else can do the same thing. This isn't a participation trophy hobby. Work for it, and you'll get it. You are smart enough to do it. And I'm talking directly to this guy when I said this. You are smart enough to do it. And right here, he replies back to me. He's like, well, I already have my permission slip. So he's claiming he has a ham radio license. Okay, good. And you still have to give me, and you still have yet to give me an answer. I've given him an answer twice now. He just doesn't like what I'm saying. Others have said that it could happen to the door having opened more frequencies and sold off privileges. That's why they don't support deregulation. Why don't you? So he's talking about having the sell off our spectrum and our bandwidth to corporations or something like that. Okay. And I replied back, finally, I was like, look, man, you calling it a permission slip makes me think you aren't serious, but I'll play along. I do support deregulation. I support taking licensing completely away from the FCC and giving it back to hams. As I've said this before, I'm not sure why you think I'm not answering you, but again, your comments are more troll-like and less than serious than I prefer, but also impossible to sense a tone over text. He says, I call the driver's license permission slips as well. It's because of my view on the government wanting to believe that they control free people. Okay, so I get this comment a lot. Free men don't ask permission. Government control. Yeah, government control is a real thing. It's a real thing I'm against. Okay, but there's such a thing as government control, too much government control, and complete anarchy. And we've got to figure out where in the middle we want this. Licensing is not bad. Licensing's not bad. You have to have a license to drive a car. And the reason you have to have a license to drive a car is because you're driving on publicly funded roads. Okay? You don't have to have a license to own a car, or if you own 100 acres of land, you don't have to have a license to drive a car on your own property. So some people like an amateur radio license. Well, I don't, anybody can get a driver's license. Sometimes people, and I'm like, well, actually, you don't have to have a driver's license to buy a car and drive it on your own property. You only have to have a license to drive it on publicly funded roads. State, local, city government, city, county roads, state roads, federal, interstate highways, whatever. But the airwaves are open to everybody, and the airwaves are open to everybody. Okay, so, well, there's no publicly funded airwaves. True, but we do have a limited spectrum of frequencies on the airwave. And like I said a minute ago, since it's an international and global effort, amateur radio licensing, it's good that it's regulated to a certain degree. To a certain degree. I don't want to take anything away from anyone, but I don't want to give everything for free to everyone either. And this comment here by this gentleman is pretty good. One of the main reasons for the ITU agreement and HF communications are worldwide. Open, no regulated, non-licensed operations on HF and MF isn't affecting radio users in just the USA. They can affect every country and every radio user in the world. Many that want licensing refer to VHF, UHF, and SHF. It would be really devastating to the world radio community for one country to open rogue HF communication, not just amateur. It's still a primary means of communications in many places around the world. Just because it's not here in the U.S., I don't believe it would be very responsible to free ban amateur radio bands without the agreement of the ITU. My opinion is that we won't see any changes to amateur radio, at least not HF and MF. As far as VHF, UHF go, the bands are almost dead. Well, again, I don't really think that the bands are dead in VHF, UHF. It might be where he is, but it's not like that everywhere. I've been an amateur for 30 years and been in commercial radio for 25 plus years. If the government does drop licensing requirements for amateur radio, please pass the word to the lids that have the equipment available cheap. That's good. Okay. And then some other guy fires back at him about deregulation and whatnot. So, a few more comments there. I'll share a link to all that in the description below. All of that to say is, as I said in the beginning, this document does not say anything about, this is a lot of speculation. This document does not say anything about deregulating specifically amateur radio licensing. It doesn't even mention amateur radio licensing. It's just talking about the FCC, so everybody's like, oh, what does that mean? And it's a good question. It's good to openly discuss what it does say, but it's probably not good to over-speculate on what it doesn't say. And that's kind of my take on the whole thing, okay? This is a longer video than I intended it to be, but amateur radio licensing in the USA and worldwide existed prior to the FCC. FCC only controls the USA anyway. Every country around the world has some sort of amateur radio licensing. Sometimes it's hard to get. Sometimes it's expensive to get. And in the USA, we actually have it pretty easy compared to our global neighbors and other countries around the world. So, do I support deregulation? To a certain degree. Do I support free banding the amateur radio bands? No. No, I don't. Go use CB radio. CB radio is HF. Guess what? HF is from 3 to 30 megahertz, and CB radio is around 26, 27 megahertz. So CB radio is HF. Go use CB radio if you want to use HF on a free band network. That's my thoughts. I would love to know what you think. Put a comment in the description below. Thanks for watching.